Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back here to the full story on WYAB 103.9 as we get into this brand new morning, and a glorious morning it is, as it's a dawn of a new day here in America, as it is finally official that Donald Trump is now the president of the United States. It's been a long journey for sure to get to this point. Almost surreal, honestly, to think of how much we've had to go through to get to this point. The amount of fighting that's had to happen, the amount of like I said, not just fighting, but just strain on him, assassination attempts, you name it. It has been one crazy election season, but now the election season is officially over as we move into action season, as I like to call it, or taking action. And taking action is exactly what Donald Trump did yesterday, as he signed a bunch of executive orders into place, as he promised throughout his campaign. And this morning, this morning we're gonna have, which will be good because we're gonna have 2 hours with you guys this morning. So I'll have this hour and the next hour. And essentially, how I want to spend it is the first hour, I want to talk about all of the things that he announced during the inauguration, and breaking those down, as well as some of the executive orders that he has already signed. So once he announced and once he actually did sign, and a few other things that were talked about at the inauguration. And then at the second hour, I want to talk at length about these pardons. So obviously, there's a last minute pardons that were made by the Biden administration, literally just moments, just hours really before Donald Trump took office, and it's of the whole cast and crew, right? Fauci, Milley, Biden's family, you name it. These very, very broad pardons, quite broad pardons. So what I want to talk about is the facts of it first. What President Biden, now ex-President Biden, former President Biden, what he signed into law, and not signed into law, what he actually signed, what his pardons were for, what they said, what they cover, who they cover. But then I want to talk about the legality of pardons themselves, because it's very interesting. They haven't really been challenged a whole lot in the court system. So I want to talk about exactly what the law says about them, because it's not as all-reaching as someone may think, and it could leave it up ripe for challenge. And maybe Pam Bondi is someone who wants to take that up, because what I also want to talk about is that if it doesn't get challenged, the kind of precedent that it sets, and it's a very, very dangerous precedent. One that the Democrats, they always start talking about, oh, we want to have a peaceful transition of power and everything like that, but they're the ones who then pardon a bunch of criminals that were in their administration. So I want to, like I said, it's going to take me quite a while to get through all of that. So those are the two major things I want to talk about. I also want to talk about a few smaller stories regarding the inauguration, things that came up. But it's going to be a fun 2 hours with you guys. As always, you can call in at 601-879-0002. I always do like hearing from you guys during the break. You guys bring up some great points or things that I should look at or things I may not have been aware of. And I'm always for that, especially if it means I can look it up. Of course, if you want to see us, live on the air, you can see us live on Rumble and YouTube. If you want to know where those links are, you can go to regulatorsproductions.com. And the way I'm going to do it is we're going to have this first hour, and then I'm going to cut the live stream just because we have about 8 minutes of just 7 to 8 minutes of by the time this show ends and the start of the next hour is with this top of the hour. So we'll cut the live stream and we'll restart it up. That way you can have a chance to see the two things. It'll be two separate videos there for people when they come back and look at it. If you come late or if you catch it late. So like I said, a couple big hours for us. That's what we're going to cover. So keep it tuned right here to the full story on WYAB 103.9. All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back here to the full story on WYAB 103.9 as we start into Donald Trump's inaugural address as well as his actions afterwards. Because, as I said, it was a pretty big day for Donald Trump. It's actually kind of crazy to think of just how long a day he's had, especially considering, I mean, just the amount of vigor between President Trump and President Biden, the difference in energy levels is quite remarkable. Because you can only imagine that Donald Trump had to get started, 5 a.m. yesterday to get ready for the inauguration. He was going all the way, all the way to midnight yesterday with balls and things like that that happened afterwards. Several different dinners and balls that were happening. But in between there, he actually got work done as he said he would. After the inauguration, after his speech in the inauguration, he went in and he's signing bills. And while he was signing bills, he was taking questions from the media at the same time. He was doing all that he could to get things going because he has an agenda to set. That's one of the good things, I guess, about him already being in his second term is that he doesn't have to worry about getting reelected. Not that getting reelected was, pandering to people for election was everything that Donald Trump did. But because he doesn't have to worry about reelection, he can focus solely on his agenda, and he has not wasted any time. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to break it down. We're gonna talk about the actual address itself. But first off, this is what he promised. This is what he promised the night before the inauguration. As he got ready right before, and we're gonna show how he followed through with this.
We're inheriting a nation faced with crises at home and abroad, but I will describe in my inaugural address tomorrow. Can you believe it? Tomorrow. It's been nasty. It's been a nasty 4 years. The administration will take immediate action to confront every single problem America faces and put our nation back on the path to success and greatness. Within hours of taking office, I will sign executive orders, close to 100 to be exact. Tomorrow we will end 4 years of failure, disaster, and decline.
All right, so that's what he said the night before, and he has come through. So now I want to move to his inaugural address itself and break it down piece by piece. And one thing I will say about his inaugural address is the fact that as you heard there in that address, he went after, just immediately started going after the Biden administration, and he didn't slow down. He started that last night, and then right in front of Biden, he was essentially talking about just how bad the last 4 years have been, which was totally the most bad a move that someone could make, to sit there and just talk down to someone right in front of them, in front of a national scene, not care. I mean, like you said, they're the ones who try to put him in prison, so why would you, right? You have nothing to the all kind of sense of respect that he has for them. Why have any? So why not take him down with you? Or take them down while you're going. So the next thing I wanted to show was this next video of his actual inaugural address, and kind of break it down piece by piece. So this is, as we get over there, his inaugural address. So like I said, it's going to take us a minute to break down all of these, just because we're going to go through quite a many. Like I said, we have 2 hours, and the great thing about having 2 hours is we can focus down in on some of these priorities that he mentioned. So here we go.
Today, I will sign a series of historic executive orders. With these actions, we will begin the complete restoration of America and the revolution of common sense. It's all about common sense.
So I'm going to go ahead and pause it right there just because I've been talking about that here on my show for months about that is going to be the defining thing about Donald Trump's second presidency is the return of common sense. And this country needs it desperately. Let's continue.
First, I will declare a national emergency at our southern border. All illegal entry will immediately be halted, and we will begin the process of returning millions and millions of criminal aliens back to the places from which they came. We will reinstate my Remain in Mexico policy. I will end the practice of catch and release. And I will send troops to the southern border to repel the disastrous invasion of our country. Will also be designating the cartels as foreign terrorist organizations.
Okay, so let's take a break right there, or pause it right there. So let's break all of that down. So there's a lot going on with that, obviously. So this has been a big part of his administration is the border, right? It's a big part of what people elected him for. It was a big part of why why so many people came out to vote for him in places that and with groups that otherwise wouldn't have voted for him. This is immediately, so right after this, right? So he immediately reversed several immigration orders from the Biden's presidency, including the one that narrowed deportation priorities to only people who commit serious crime or are deemed national security threats. It then returns to his first term policy that everyone in the country illegally is a priority for deportation or is going to be deported, right? So essentially what the Biden administration was doing is they just allowed people to stay here. As long as you're here, who cares, right? Stay as long as you like. And then they wouldn't deport them until after they committed a crime. Well, that's kind of already too late by that point, right? With Lake and Riley, of course, Donald Trump talking about the cartels and the dangerousness that they have, but as well as just the illegal people themselves, where you have the death of Lake and Riley, directly responsible the Biden administration for not getting a guy out, a guy who had been arrested several times, but they wait for him to murder someone. Oh, okay, now we'll deport you. Too late. Too late. The people have already been victimized. So that was a huge order that he signed. As you heard him there, he did declare a national emergency at the U.S.-Mexico border, which allows him to send U.S. troops to help support immigration agents and shut down the border. And to me, this is absolutely huge, and something that I have advocated for a long time. I talk about the fact that I was in the Army myself for 7.5 years, almost 8 years, and how we're wholly underutilizing the military. We've been focused so much on foreign wars for so many years. We have forgotten the domestic nature of the Army and what the Army can do or the military, not just the Army, but the military itself, can do domestically. What the Army has historically done domestically, because its number one job is to protect our country from invasion, and there's been nothing short of an invasion on our southern border. And the United States military and the United States Army is directly suited for this type of activity. Number one, we have we have soldiers in all the different types of MOS or jobs that can specialize in it, right? So going back to Trump's presidency, his first term, where he deployed troops to the border back then. In fact, I helped a unit that was or provided assistance to a unit that deployed down to the Arizona border. So that was an engineer unit that I was a legal advisor for, and what they specialized in as engineers was building a wall, or in that case, building mostly Constantine wire through the border, right? And that's what they do. That's what they do in overseas wars. That's what they can do here. They have the equipment to do it. Building Constantine wire, other sorts of berms and things like that, as well as walls and structures to support that. We also had military police down there. I also advised the military police unit. Military police units there to handle the actual arrests of illegal immigrants, or essentially holding them for the time being until we can transfer them out. So they can handle that type of activity, as well as provide security for those type of holding facilities. We have soldiers who specialize in detainee operations. And that's what they can also handle that same thing over there, especially a large mass of people. In fact, the Army is especially suited for that quite amazingly well. Because again, we were built to, just like for an overseas war, if we take in a lot of POWs like we would in a major conflict, we have the ability and the materials and the facilities that we can build by the engineers to house several of these detainees, to be able to then process them and get them back, or to further process them in other ways. Secondly, we also had infantrymen guarding the border itself. And again, what better person to guard it than an infantryman? Infantrymen aren't there to arrest people. That's not what they do. Again, that's what you have MPs for. They can hold them until the MPs can, or hand them over to the MPs for detainee operations. But what better person? Someone who is trained in running and being a guard, and running and taking care of an area of responsibility, and to be on watch. That's number one job of general order number one, right? About never leaving your post. They're especially suited for controlling the border. And one thing that was kind of interesting to me about a lot of European countries is they also already have their military at the border. Their military is responsible for border security. And so essentially we have the infantrymen who can take watch, who can guard the border itself. And during Trump's first presidency, one of the infantry unit that I was an advisor for, a legal advisor for, we teach them about the rules of engagement, and essentially. Donald Trump allowed a lot of things for our soldiers back at that time. There's a lot of restrictions, obviously, with soldiers on home turf, as there should be, right? We don't want to have a military style, enforcement action by the federal government. But they have special authority when it comes to the border, because the federal government is responsible for the border. We know that because the Biden administration was fighting desperately the the state of Texas on the state of Texas, hey, you're not controlling the border, so maybe maybe we'll do it. We'll use our National Guard, and the federal government prevented them from doing so, and they had a right to because the federal government is responsible. Therefore, you can use the federal army, the actual active army, to do this. So you have the infantrymen who can do it, and they're remarkably well at doing it. Like I said, during Trump's first term, when I was advising them, taught them about the rules of engagement, they had an incident where they had this made news, so it's nothing secret or anything like that. It made news at the time where one of the soldiers, some Mexican soldiers, had crossed the border unknowingly. They didn't know exactly where the border was, and they had encountered U.S. soldiers. Because again, interestingly enough, Mexico had soldiers at their border. Why shouldn't we have soldiers at ours? You would think, right? And they both drew guns on each other. It was a literally Mexican standoff between us and them, and they diffused the situation perfectly, showing they were able to handle a high-stakes situation. And these are young kids, right? 19, 20, 21, 22 years old. They were able to handle the situation perfectly because they had the training to do so. And they were able to detain and keep out these foreign invaders. And what better way to do it than if you have fully automatic weapons? There's nothing better to use. And there's levels of engagement for that, right? And how to keep them, how to run checkpoints. They know how to run checkpoints as infantrymen as well. They know how to do search and rescue. They know how to do searching, like I said, running the line itself. All of these operations, they also can set up camps out there, right? The thing with Border Patrol agents, they have to go home every day. And a soldier, his home is out there, right? We actually, at that time, were setting up forward operating, essentially what we call FOBs, forward operating bases out there, creating tents for people to live in, mess halls, gyms, post offices, all of it just out there in the Arizona desert to support the soldiers that are running out there on the border. And they can do that, right? We can deploy them out there for months at a time, if not longer, just because that's what soldiers do is they deploy. As one brigade commander put it, I'll never forget. He said the Army is about deployment, not employment, and that's a big difference between the Army and the Border Patrol. We've had some really, really great Border Patrol agents. Don't get me wrong, right? We've had some very dedicated Border Patrol agents who have not gotten that support from the last administration. But there is a huge difference in the how much you can get done with the Army versus the Border Patrol. Because at the end of the day, the Border Patrol are civilian employees, and you're inherently limited by what you can do compared to the United States Army, especially with that show of force. And right now, we have a bunch of guys. We need to be getting out of foreign wars. We're going to talk about that a little bit later. But Donald Trump did talk about getting out of foreign wars, which we have been involved in for so long. Getting out of those and focusing here, right, on America first, that America first philosophy that Donald Trump has always talked about. And we can do that with the military down there and using our military for the benefit of our citizens, right? Not using our soldiers, our sons and daughters to support other countries, but to use them to support our own country, to provide a service to our own citizens. And not only that, again, people have a sense of pride. I will never forget at the time, when we first did it, is soldiers have a sense of pride to be able to do that because they're able to see the fruits of their labor, right? When you go and fight in a foreign war for some other country, you don't ever really see the fruits of your labor. It's like it's time lost. And after our withdrawal, our embarrassing withdrawal from Afghanistan, that was even more clear to a lot of service members. Was like, why did we do it? Why were we ever there? Because they saw their own friends, their best friends, their people who were like family to them get killed. And then we just run out of there with our tails tucked between our legs. It was embarrassing. But you have soldiers who can do things here on our own border, on our own territory. Then they can see the fruits of their labor. They feel like they are getting a job done. Right? They're doing something for the American people. They're doing something for their country, which is why most of them, as they should have joined, that's why they joined to begin with, is to serve their country. And this is an opportunity to do that and to see that actually works. And to say, hey, we are actually keeping our country safe. We're keeping our mothers, our fathers, our brothers, our sisters, our daughters, our sons, and our wives. We are keeping them and husbands, we are keeping them safe. We are keeping the dangerous element out of this country, and being able to provide this kind of security for the United States, which is just something is a great feeling for those soldiers. Again, something that you don't get otherwise. Okay, we're going to take another break right here. When we get back, we'll continue on about Donald Trump and the inauguration and the promises that he made. Again, if you want to call in during the break, number 601-879-0002. Keep it tuned to the full story on WYAB 103.9. All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back here to the full story on WYAB 103.9 as we continue on talking about Donald Trump's inauguration, his speech, as well as actions he took right afterwards, some EOs that he took right afterwards. So we're going to continue on with his inaugural speech, and the next one is pretty interesting from a legal standpoint. And this is a lot of things that I love talking about with Donald Trump. With a lot of these legalities, because he's willing to challenge the norm. So let's go to the next one.
And by invoking the Alien Enemies Act of 1798, I will direct our government to use the full and immense power of federal and state law enforcement to eliminate the presence of all foreign gangs and criminal networks, bringing devastating crime to U.S. soil, including our cities and inner cities. As Commander-in-Chief, I have no higher responsibility than to defend our country from threats and invasions, and that is exactly what I am going to do. We will do it at a level that nobody's ever seen before. Next, I will direct all members of my cabinet to marshal the vast powers at their disposal to defeat what was record inflation.
Sorry, we go back there. We'll get to the inflation in just a second. Okay, so let's talk about the Alien Enemies Act for a minute. Because thing to pull up, it's something he's mentioned before. He's mentioned it on the campaign trail. So let's talk about the Alien Enemies Act itself. What is it? Because again, this is pulling up this again. This is what I like about Donald Trump. He's looking at all the tools at his disposal, things that people had never really thought about before. So let's talk about the Alien Enemies Act. So this all comes from the Alien and Sedition Acts of 1798, which applied to restrictions to immigration and speech in the United States. And it came after the Naturalization Act of 1798 increased the requirements to seek citizenship. So essentially, it had a couple main parts. So you had the Alien Friends Act of 1798, which allowed the president to imprison and deport non-citizens. Then you had the Alien Enemies Act, what he just talked about, of 1798, which gave the president additional powers to detain non-citizens during times of war. And that's going to be interesting when we talk about war. It also had the Sedition Act of 1798, which criminalized false and malicious statements about the federal government. So there were three things there. Interesting thing is that the Alien Friends Act and the Sedition Act expired after a set of number of years, and the Naturalization Act was repealed in 1802. However, the Alien Enemies Act that Donald Trump talked about is still in effect under 50 U.S.C. Chapter 3. So it was, you got to remember the time of this, right? So this is just before the country is brand new. We were worried about other foreign powers are going to try to take advantage of us, right? By essentially sending people in to take us out from the inside. That was a key worry of the United States at the time. This was passed by the Federalist Party, and kind of fought by the Democratic Republicans. But interestingly, like I said, this is a key concern that they had, is that people could essentially infiltrate the country from the inside and take us out from the inside. And that is why these acts were passed. So let's talk about the Alien Enemies Act for a second. Officially, it's called an Act Respecting Alien Enemies, and it was passed to supplement the Alien Friends Act that I just talked about earlier. But under this law, the president could authorize the arrest, relocation, or deportation of any male over the age of 14 who hailed from a foreign country. And this was, unlike the other parts of the law, very interestingly, this was passed almost unanimously because both of them, both parties at the time recognized the interesting, the worry of these alien enemies. So essentially, it is, it applies again. The only part left of this, and so what it says here is that when can the president invoke it? So let's talk about that first. And this is directly from the law. So this is 50 U.S. Code Section 21. And it says whenever there is a declared war between the United States and any foreign nation or government, comma, or any invasion or predatory incursion is perpetrated, attempted, or threatened against the territory of the United States by any foreign nation or government, and there's so you have two ors, and the president makes public proclamation of the event, all native citizens, denizens, or subjects of the hostile nation or government, being the age of 14 years and upward, who shall be within the United States and not actually naturalized, shall be liable to be apprehended, restrained, secured, and removed as alien enemies. The president is authorized in any such event by his proclamation thereof or other public act to direct the conduct to be observed on the part of the United States toward the aliens who become so liable, the manner and degree of the restraint to which they shall be subjected, in what case, blah, 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 blah. It goes on to talk more about that. So a couple things to break down with that, okay? So one, it has to be a declared war between the United States and any foreign nation, or any invasion or predatory incursion is perpetrated, attempted, or threatened against the United States by any foreign nation or government. So there's a couple pieces to that. That first one, so this act hasn't been invoked essentially 3 times. So first, President James Monroe invoked the act against British nationals during the War of 1812. And then President Woodrow Wilson invoked the act against nations of the or nationals of the Central Powers, so Germans, for instance, during World War I. Interestingly, in 1918, the amendment to the act struck the provision restricting the law to males, so it's most males and females. As I mentioned what I just read off to you was the updated law. So it applies both to males and females, which the first act, when it originally passed, did not. But the third time it was December 7th, 1941, obviously, in response to the bombing of Pearl Harbor, which happened on the same day. President Franklin D. Roosevelt used the authority of the Aliens Enemy Act to issue presidential proclamations against Japanese, German, and Italians to apprehend, restrain, secure, and remove Japanese, German, and Italian non-citizens. Roosevelt later cited further wartime powers to issue Executive Order 9066, which interned Japanese Americans, which was something separate from the Aliens and Sedition Act. So there was actually a Supreme Court about that called the Korematsu case. That's something completely separate. They're kind of related, but they're different authorities. And the Supreme Court found the internment legal in the Korematsu case, which is crazy to think about because they were American citizens. However, in Leducky v. Watkins from 1948, the Supreme Court also ruled that the Alien Enemies Act is still a viable law, and that the United States could even deport people after a treaty is signed. So again, every time that we've used that the president has used this is that there's been a declaration of war. And declaration of war is interesting because a declaration of war has to happen from Congress, and it's usually against a nation. So that's that first part. However, there is a second part to that. There is an or, right? And that second one is or any invasion or predatory incursion which is perpetrated, attempted, or threatened against the territory of the United States by any foreign nation or government. So there, this as I'm thinking what Donald Trump and his attorneys up there, who are smarter than I am, but I would imagine that's what they're going to be resting their hat on, is that section of the law where it is clear that right now the southern border there is an invasion or predatory incursion from these foreign nationals, some from very very many different countries, um, and uh, and it's the second part there though is interesting, is that the invasion or predatory incursion is by any foreign nation or government. So whether that gets met, that's going to be to me the interesting part of how they finagle that. And so they could say that hey, these countries are purposely sending their people up here, which is essentially I think what they'd have to do in order to be able to invoke this law, by saying that hey, Venezuela or Mexico, they are purposely sending these people up here to weaken our country, or China, for instance, is coordinating with these people, or something to that effect, to use the Alien and Sedition Act. Um, but essentially, it gives them pretty wide swath to detain people. But then it also brings up the point of, um, you know, do you actually need this? Because so again, what the Alien and Sedition Act, or the Alien Entities Act, which is part of the Alien and Sedition Act, what it what it's been used for in the previous ones is for citizens who are here legally. So whether kind of going back to the World War II version, right, that Franklin Roosevelt signed, that was to essentially detain and then deport citizens of Germany, Italy, and Japan, right? And so they were here legally. And so because they're here legally, there is no other way to deport them. With Donald Trump, and with this, one thing to think about is that, well, if they're here illegally already, then we don't need the Alien and Sedition Acts to be able to deport them. It would only be needed if for people who are here legally and they are somehow helping out an invasion of the United States. So, the rare instance it could be used, I think, would be people who were coordinating, or using people who are naturalized citizens who are, or not naturalized citizens, but are here legally, and are essentially allowing this invasion to happen, is or somehow coordinating it. But then again, you could probably deport them too, even if they're here, or revoke whatever green card they have, because of the crimes they're committing against the United States. Because if they're here committing crimes, or they're already doing a crime, which illegal aliens are doing by just being here, they don't really need this act. So to me, it'd be a very limited circumstance in which you would use it, just because again, we're not fighting a war with any of these countries, which really what this law is designed to do. You can debate whether that's even right, because there's some pretty good argument to say, hey, that seems to be inherently wrong. But you got to understand, especially like something like Pearl Harbor, where some Japanese, even Japanese Americans, people who were actually citizens, were sending information back to Japan. So there was a legitimate worry that these people, that's why it's sedition is in the name, were using this to harm the United States. All right, we're going to take another break right here. When we get back, we'll have a short time in between the first hour and second hour, but we'll continue on, and we'll get into the pardons as well in the second hour. So keep it tuned here to The Full Story on WYAB 103.